Hello my sweet friends, and welcome to my channel where I share kinda shabby but always chic crafty inspirations. My name is Becky and I am so glad that you are joining me today for episode 4 of my summer sewing series. Previously we've made Keyring Coin Pouches and also Zippered Wrislet Pouches. And we also made custom fitted Bible covers that can also be sized perfectly for journals, notebooks, and planners. And today we are doing book sleeves. I have a tab closure and also a tie closure tutorial to share with you today. And whether you choose the tab closure or the tie closure, each of these can accommodate most sizes of your iPads and most of your standard sized paperbacks as well. And certain sizes of hardcover books will fit inside there as well. Well, there is lots of fun in store today, so let's get these projects started. I am going to be making one of each style today. The base for each of these is the same. The only difference is the type of closure that you will use. You will need 2 pieces of your outer fabric, and before quilting, each piece was 12.5 inches high and 10.5 inches wide. And so after measuring, marking, and sewing my quilting lines and then cutting off the excess, I am left with a piece then that is 12 high and 10 inches wide. And I have a video linked in the description box below to show you exactly how to measure, mark, and stitch your quilting lines. I then cut 2 pieces of lining fabric, and again these are 12 inches high and 10 inches wide. And I did the same thing with this fabric that I'm going to be using for the tab. And all of these measurements are in the description box below. And I also applied a medium weight fusible interfacing to the backs of each of my lining pieces, and I did cut my interfacing to be about a 1/2 inch smaller all the way around my lining piece. For the ties, I then cut 2 pieces of just a beautiful white cotton muslin, and they are 18 inches long and they are 5 inches wide. I then folded them in half and ironed a crease. I just took a piece of cardstock and I made it a little bit wider than my fabric, and I graded it from point to point just so it would just make a nice little arch all the way down. You want this bottom piece to be on the crease of your fabric. Place that 1/4 inch in and 1/4 inch down from the top. Then I just trace my template because we will be sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance on our ties. Back tack. Now as we're coming up onto the template that we traced onto our fabric, we're just going to take our time and stitch on that line. And I'm not stretching the fabric, I'm just simply supporting it in the front and in the back with my hands. We're going to backstitch just a couple of stitches and come forward. And you're just going to follow that same process and do your other tie the same way. We are going to press our seam, and that is also going to remove my marker. And I use these heat erasable marking pens, and I will have these linked below for you as well. And we're going to clip off our threads, come to the end of our arch here and snip that corner. And we're also going to trim close to our stitching, and you're going to do that to both of your pieces. And after trimming your excess, you're going to come to those rounded edges and make little snips. And that is going to help that fabric to lie flat when we turn this right side out. And you only need to do that on the curved portion, and you're going to do that to both of your pieces. Use my lint roller to pick up any of those excess threads. And then we're going to turn our tie right side out. I'm using a bone folder, and it has a nice tip on there, but it's blunt, so it's not going to poke a hole in my fabric. And I'm going to poke that tip out there. And then I go back in with my finger and run it along the seam. That way when we go to press this, everything is going to lie nice and flat. And now we're going to take that seam and just kind of finger press it and roll it to where it's on the edge of the fabric. So that makes it lie nice and flat. And then we're going to come back and give that a good press. After pressing, you can leave them like this, but I do like to top stitch mine just to kind of finish off those edges and make it look nice and neat. And we're going to stitch very close to the edge, about 1/8 of an inch away, down and all the way back around on each one of our ties here. And you don't need to backstitch because this raw edge will be caught up in the seam allowance. And when I get to the edge here, I'm going to come down and pivot and continue slowly stitching around the curved edge. And you'll just finish sewing down the opposite edge here and do your other tie in the same fashion. Then you'll clip your threads and give everything a good press. Now you're going to take your 2 outer fabric pieces and we're going to lay them face down, and we are going to be stitching around the outside edge and leaving one 12-inch long section open. So you're just going to match up your corners and pin or clip that into place. And once you have those 3 sides pinned or clipped into place, we're going to go stitch a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around these 3 sides here. I'm going to line my fabric up, back tack, and come forward. And you'll just keep sewing straight until you get to the corner, and you will pivot at your corner. And when we get to the end, we're going to back tack and come forward again to complete our stitching. Clip your threads, and then we'll bring in our lining pieces. And again, we are going to place our lining pieces right sides together. I want this to be just a tiny bit smaller on the inside than our outer lining, so that lining doesn't bunch up inside our book sleeve. So I'm using the edge of my cutting mat here, and I'm going to mark 1 inch down from that edge and mark 1 inch down on this edge as well. Then I'm going to come to this long edge here, and I'm going to leave a space of a couple of inches open because that's where we're going to be turning our project. Now, where we've made these marks, I'm going to mark my 1/2 inch seam allowance right here. So that's what it looks like so far. But then I'm going to mark out 5/8 of an inch right here. I'm just going to use the edge of my seam gauge here to grade out. And we're going to stitch a 1/2 inch until we get to our 1 inch mark. And then 1 inch below that, so 2 inches from the top, is where I made my 5/8 inch mark. Let's start with our 1/2 inch, come into our 5/8 inch, and we're going to stitch that down and around and stopping here. And then same thing on this side. We're going to start at a 1/2 inch. We've graded down to a 5/8 inch, and we're going to stitch that 5/8 inch down and around to our stopping point for our opening here. I'm just going to take a second to clip all of my edges in place, and then we'll head to the machine and get this sewn down. Remember, we're starting at 1/2 inch and grading out to that 5/8 inch. Back tack and come forward, and then we're going to gradually take our fabric out to that 5/8 inch. And then you're just going to sew as you normally would, pivoting at the corners and then stopping at your opening. And then back tack at your opening. And I'm starting at the other opening, and I'm going to stitch around back to the top. Back tacking there. Pivoting at the corner, and then when I get here, I'm going to gradually grade out to the 1/2 inch mark and back tack. Come forward to complete my stitches. And we're going to clip our threads, and then we are going to box the corners of our lining and also of our outer fabric as well, and it just gives just a little bit more room in your book sleeve. So you're going to come down to your bottom corner, pull out the sides and form a triangle, and you're going to open up those seam allowances, and you can feel that you have matched those seams. Press that just a little bit. You don't want to go too far in because we're only going to be doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then we're going to come over to the other corner here, pulling it into a triangle shape, opening up those seam allowances. Feel that you've matched those two seams together, and we're just going to press that edge down. We've got this nice little arrow shape here, and right here at the actual seam is where I'm going to measure, and this line on my ruler is 1/2 inch. So I'm going to place that line right on the V, draw across that with my marking pen, and I'm going to come to the other side and mark it in the same fashion. So now that we have those marked on the lining, you're going to take your outer fabric and you're going to do the same thing, matching up those seams to form a triangle, and give that a little press. Come over to our other corner and do the same thing, and then again marking in a 1/2 inch from this area right here on each of your seams. Now that we have all of those marked, we're going to go stitch right across that line. Back tack and come forward. Back tack at the end and come forward to complete your stitches. And you will do that same process to all the remaining corners of your lining and your outer fabric as well. And with all of those stitched down, we're now going to clip our threads, and then we are going to trim off that corner close to our stitching. And that looks good. And now you're going to take your outer fabric and we're going to turn it right side out. poke out those corners. And I have a tailor's hem here, but you could also use a rolled up hand towel. And I'm going to place that inside, open that seam, and I'm going to take the tip of my iron and run it along that seam, just like that. And I'm going to come over here and do the same thing to this side. And that looks great. So we're going to get our lining and we're going to leave it inside out, and we're going to press those seams open on our lining. Just like that. It looks fantastic. And then we're going to come down to the opening at the bottom, finger press those out of the way, and then lightly go over that with the iron. So now we're going to take our outer fabric and we are going to tuck it into the lining fabric so those right sides are going to be together. Match up our seams and either pin or clip those into place. Then we need to put our ties in there. Lay your ties together and make sure that they are the same length, because even though you cut them the same length, sometimes they don't always end up the same size. You're going to take your ties and fold it in half, make a little bit of a finger crease, and then use one of your heat erasable marking pens to mark it in the middle. And you're going to do the same thing to each one of your ties here. Then you're going to take your pieces here, line up those seam allowances, and you're going to mark the middle on your lining fabric. And now you're going to take one of your straps, and I put it with the curved edge down and tuck it underneath there. And I just go ahead and pull it out through the opening just so I know it's not going to get in the way. And line up my marks. And I leave about 1/4 inch of the fabric exposed there. And then I can go ahead and clip that into place. And then you come over to the other side and do the same thing. And then you're just going to finish pinning or clipping around the outer edges, making sure that you match those edges up with each other. And with everything pinned into place, we are going to go stitch around the entire outside of our little sleeve here using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I removed the back portion of my platform of my sewing machine here, so that way I can get all of this in here and just sew in a complete circle. Back tack and come forward. And before you go over your seam allowance, just look quickly underneath there just to make sure that both of your seams are lying flat and open. And you're just going to stitch that way all around the outside of your book sleeve. And we are nearly back where we started, so we're just going to continue to sew just a little bit past where you started. Back tack and come forward to finish your stitching. So after stitching that all down, once again clip off all of our threads. And then I'm going to run my lint roller over everything. And now we're going to come to our opening. We're going to pull and turn everything right side out. Push the seam toward my lining and use the tip of my iron to press that seam open. And come over here and do the same thing on the other side. And then we're going to come down to the bottom where our opening is. Make sure that's lying all nice and flat and give that a good press. And then we're going to stitch that opening closed using a very small seam allowance. So our opening starts right here. So I'm going to come up just about a 1/4 inch above that, and that's where I'm going to begin my stitches. And then I'm going to end my stitches about a 1/4 inch past where our opening ends, right here as well. Once again, clipping our threads, lint rolling our lining, and then we're going to take our lining and tuck it inside our outer fabric, pressing out those corners, making sure that the lining fabric is pressed into your outer fabric corners as well. And then I always take my fingers and just run it along those seams, just making sure everything lies nice and flat. Now we're going to work that edge to where the lining fabric is just tucked in, and we're going to press that edge. And you can see this wants to roll out, so we're going to turn this over. I'm going to work that down and give that a good press. And we are going to edge stitch near the edge there, and that is going to finish off that edge, and it's also going to keep our lining from rolling to the outside. I'm going to start on what is going to be the lower back corner. Back tack and come forward. I'm going to bring my tie over the top of my seam guide, and I'm supporting the fabric from the front and the back. I am not pulling, I'm not stretching, I'm just supporting the fabric. And we're going to stitch just like this all the way around until we come right back where we started. And as we are coming back to our starting point, I go just a little bit past that, back tack a few stitches, and come forward to complete that stitch. And once again, we are going to clip off our threads, and then you just put in your book or an iPad, tie that up. So cute. And I will be putting together the front pieces and the lining pieces, and I'm going to do that off camera, but I'm going to be doing it just exactly the same way. I'm going to box those corners and do all of that, and then I'll join you again on camera to show you what you need to do to make a tab. And I forgot to tell you, if you are selling these, make sure that you put your logo on what you would consider to be the back, and put that inside your lining before you stitch your lining pieces together. Your tab is going to be inserted on the back section, and then we'll actually insert the little snap closure on the front. For the shape of the tab itself, I took a piece of white cardstock, and it is 6 inches long and 2.5 inches wide, and then I folded it down the middle and just rounded that edge off. You'll need to cut 2 of these in your fabric pieces, just like this. And then on one of those pieces, I used some fusible fleece interfacing, and it's not very thick, but it is going to give some stability to that tab for it to be opening and closing repeatedly. And I made another template. It is 5.5 inches long and 2 inches wide for my fusible fleece, just to make it easier. And then on the back of one of your pieces, you're just going to iron on that fusible fleece. And now we are going to put the 2 pieces right sides together, and you are going to pin or clip into place, leaving the bottom open for turning. And with all those edges secured down, we're going to go and stitch a 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way around, and we're going to back tack here, stitch around, and back tack at this other side as well. And when we start to do our curve, just stitch slowly around, following the shape. And then stitch all the way down and back tack at the end. Clip your threads and press. And then we're going to trim this down just a little bit. After trimming, we are going to clip into the curve. So that's just going to help it lie flat when we turn it right side out. After clipping all the way around your curved area, come down to the bottom and turn this right side out. You want to take your time so you don't pull and stress those seams. Run along that seam all the way down each side. Work those seams flat and give it a good press. Then, just as we did on the ties here, we're going to stitch 1/8 inch all the way around our tab as well. And again, we're going to trim the threads and press. It just looks nice. Now we're going to bring in our book sleeve. I'm going to bring those seams together, find the middle, give it a little mark, fold my tab in half, give it a mark as well. And then I'm going to drop it in between the lining and the outer fabric. Line up my marks. Then we're going to pin or clip into place all the way around our book sleeve. With all of your edges pinned or clipped into place, once again stitch around the entire outside of our sleeve with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And trim threads, lint roll up any excess thread. I'm going to come to our opening and turn right side out. And push out all of your corners. We're going to make sure those seams are going toward our lining and press along that seam. And same thing on the other side. And come to the opening and make sure those edges are lined up and press. Then after stitching and clipping my threads, we're going to tuck our lining down into our sleeve to really work that lining down into our little book sleeve, making sure that we press out those corners. And again, I'm tucking that lining slightly shorter than the outer fabric, and I'm going to give that a press. And same thing on this side. And again, I'm going to go and stitch down close to the edge to keep that lining from rolling out, just like we did on our tied version of our book sleeve. And that looks great. So now we are going to need a snap. And I bought this set off of Amazon, and I will link that for you below. And it comes with your instructions. It also comes with an awl that you're going to need to poke a hole to put your snap through. It comes with this snap setter, and it also comes with an assortment of colors. Now the size that I got is the size 20. They're a little bit larger, but I wanted to make sure I had something big enough that was going to go through that tab on my book sleeve. You're going to pick out 2 caps. Kind of hard to see that. This piece is your stud, and this piece is your socket. And you'll need one of each of those. And then I'm going to take my tab and fold it in half to find the middle, and I'm really going to also finger press that crease. And then I'm going to come up 3/4 of an inch from the edge, put a dot there, and I use just a piece of foam and I place it underneath there. Take my awl, which has a very sharp point on it, poke straight through that, and you can see it goes right through there. And I do move that through the hole there a couple of times just to make sure it's going to stay open when I remove the awl. And then I'm going to take one of the caps and put that through there, and you can see it's poking right through that fabric. And then I'm taking the stud piece and placing that down over the top, and there is a slight depression in the base here, and you want to fit that cap into the depression there and make sure everything is lined up, and then give it a squeeze. And most of the time I can get this squeezed down even with arthritis in my hands. Occasionally I'll have to have Mr. Shabby do that for me, but once you squeeze that down, that sharp point of your snap cap is then flattened inside the stud area there. And then I bring my tab over, and I like to leave some space because if you've got some books in there, you want to make sure that you've got an opening there. And I look and make sure it's all lined up, and then I just really press down onto that snap, and it leaves a depression in the fabric there. And I mark that with my heat erasable pen. I'm going to put this here so I don't poke a hole through the rest of my sleeve, and move the other side out of the way. And that mark is about 1 3/8 inches away from the edge here. And we're going to poke a hole, work the awl through there, make sure we get that nice and open through all of our quilting and our interfacing. And this time your cap is going to go on the inside, and you'll work that through your fabric. Push all that down out of the way. And then you'll take the socket portion and place that over the top there. Again, you're going to rest that cap inside the depression of your snap setter. Hold flat and press. And once again, that sharp point becomes flattened inside of the socket. And I always test it a couple of times just to make sure that I did that right. And you can fit an iPad in there, or you can fit a couple of standard size paperbacks in there. And they just turn out so very cute, and such a functional thing too. So if you're going on vacation or you're a member of a book club, you can take books, or you can take your iPad and hang out at Starbucks and drink coffee and read and scroll to your heart's content. Aren't these just adorable? If you enjoyed today's book sleeve tutorial, please give this video a like or comment below. And I hope you'll come back for episode 5 when we make these beautiful tote bags. And until next time, my sweet friends, be blessed.